My name is Declan Whitefeather. I am a seed vault engineer who survived the first 48 hours of the zombie apocalypse when a plant virus jumped to humans. The facility I dedicated my life to was supposed to save humanity after a disaster, not during. 1. Now I must use my botanical knowledge to find a cure while evading the infected who surround me. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Declan Whitefeather. Before the world ended, I preserved seeds that might save humanity one day. I never thought one day would come so soon. For 15 years, I worked as a seed vault engineer at the Appalachian Seed Repository, a facility most people never knew existed. 30 miles from Asheville, North Carolina, buried deep in the mountainside, we maintained one of the world's largest collections of agricultural heritage. Our bunker was designed to outlast nuclear war, climate disasters, even asteroid impacts, preserving the genetic diversity that would let survivors rebuild. I spent my days cataloging, testing, and maintaining perfect conditions for over 30,000 varieties of seeds. Temperature, humidity, light exposure, all precisely controlled to keep dormant life viable for centuries. My job was to prepare for apocalyptic scenarios, just not this one. Not something that would turn people into monsters while I watched helplessly through security monitors. My team, Dr. Lynn, our head botanist, Eliza, our agricultural historian, and Mark, our systems engineer, they were all at a conference in Atlanta when it happened. I was alone in the facility that Tuesday, in April 2023. Just a normal day of logging samples and running diagnostics. I had no idea it would be the last normal day of my life. There were warning signs I should have recognized. 3 days earlier, our experimental tomato cultures had turned black within hours. The decay pattern was unlike anything I had seen before. Blackened veins spreading through the leaves and fruit, followed by rapid tissue degradation. I documented it, sent samples to our partner lab, but continued with routine tasks. A mistake that haunts me still. My grandfather, a Choctaw elder who taught me about plants before I ever studied botany in college, always told me that plants speak to those who listen. The experimental crops were screaming and I failed to hear them. There had been government researchers visiting the lab the week before, men and women in plain clothes with military posture, taking samples from our fungal resistance study. They asked detailed questions about cross-species contamination protocols. I thought it was standard oversight, maybe related to grant renewals. I was wrong. The news had mentioned an unusual illness in Chicago and Boston, but media always sensationalizes new flu strains. My sister Charlotte called from her home outside Charlotte, mentioning her neighbor acting strangely, becoming aggressive and disoriented. I told her it was probably stress or drugs. I was wrong about that too. That final morning, I was documenting moisture readings for our heirloom corn samples. Such a mundane task. Miguel, our head of security, had been making more frequent radio check-ins from the perimeter. Unusual, but not alarming. The power had fluctuated twice, causing the backup systems to engage momentarily. Again, unusual but not unprecedented in our remote location. What should have alarmed me was the wildlife behavior. The observation cameras showed birds suddenly abandoning the trees around our facility, all at once as if responding to some signal humans couldn't perceive. Animals know things before we do. Another lesson from my grandfather I failed to apply. I was calibrating humidity sensors when the first emergency alert blared from my phone. The screen filled with warnings. Stay indoors. Avoid contact with infected individuals, national emergency declared. I tried calling headquarters immediately. No answer. Tried Miguel on the radio. Static. Called my sister. Straight to voicemail. The satellite connection in the communications room still worked, barely. News channels showed chaos unfolding in cities across the eastern seaboard. Footage from Atlanta showed people attacking each other in the streets, military vehicles blocking access to downtown Washington, D.C. A reporter in Charlotte, panic visible behind her professional demeanor, described victims with rabid behavior, attacking hospital staff before her broadcast cut to static. I pulled up the security camera feeds. The main gate seemed calm initially, just the empty access road winding through the forest. Then a delivery truck appeared, moving too fast on the curved mountain road. It swerved suddenly as if avoiding something invisible and crashed into the trees about 50 yards from our gate. I watched, heart pounding, as the driver stumbled out. Even through the grainy footage, I could tell something was wrong with him. He moved with a lurching gait, head tilted at an unnatural angle. His skin appeared gray, with visible dark lines tracing his veins. When Miguel approached the crash to help, the driver lunged with inhuman speed. The security feed showed them struggling before both disappeared from frame. The radio remained silent. I knew then that I needed to seal the facility. The repository had lockdown protocols for various scenarios. I enacted the highest level, designed for terrorist threats. Steel shutters descended over all external doors and windows. Internal air filtration engaged, cutting off outside ventilation. The entry used a 3-door airlock system with decontamination features between each barrier. I sealed all 3, overriding the safety protocols that normally prevented complete isolation. As afternoon turned to evening, I tried every communication method available. Landlines were dead, cell service completely gone. The satellite connection flickered in and out, providing fragments of information, none of it good. Cities in chaos. Hospitals overwhelmed. Military establishing quarantine zones. The infected showing extraordinary aggression and apparent immunity to pain. My sister called one final time, the connection breaking up. "They're breaking into the houses on our street," she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Not people. Not anymore." Then a crash in the background, her scream, and the call dropped. That was the last I heard from anyone in my family. Through the facility cameras, I watched as more infected gathered outside. They moved with that same wrong gait. Not the shuffling of movie zombies, but something more unsettling. Their movements had a predatory efficiency despite appearing broken. By midnight, I counted 23 of them circling the building, testing doors and windows with more coordination than seemed possible. One of them was Miguel, his security uniform torn and bloodied. I knew the word for what they were. What everyone was avoiding saying in the broadcasts. Zombies. The infected weren't dying, they were transforming. Their bodies remained animated after the person inside was gone. They hunted in packs. They spread the infection through bites and bodily fluids. Every horror movie cliché made terrifyingly real. Yet something about this outbreak felt different from fictional scenarios. The speed of infection. The coordination among the infected. The plant connection I was only beginning to suspect. That first night I barricaded myself in the staff dormitory section, though the sealed vault doors should have been sufficient protection. Sleep came in restless bursts, interrupted by emergency broadcasts and the occasional thud of something striking. The exterior walls. I woke from a dream of my grandfather showing me a blackened seed that whispered with a human voice, "Some seeds are not meant to sprout." I spent the next morning searching our research databases. The decay pattern in our experimental crops matched exactly what glimpses I'd seen of the infected: blackened veins, rapid tissue degradation, abnormal growth responses. Working on intuition, I accessed the secure server where we stored data on the government project. Most files were encrypted, but the basic research parameters were clear enough. Engineered fungal strains designed to improve crop resistance to drought and disease. One folder contained preliminary safety studies on cross-species contamination risks. The fungal spores weren't supposed to affect humans. The genetic modifications had been certified as safe. Yet one report flagged anomalous brain activity in lab mice exposed to heavy concentrations. The report was marked "requires further study" and dated just 3 weeks earlier. I found something else, too. A requisition order for specialized containment units to be installed at 5 locations across the country, including our facility. The units had been scheduled for delivery next month. Too late. By midday, I had pieced together a terrifying possibility. A modified ergot fungus, related to the kind that caused Salem witch trials hallucinations, had been engineered to transfer beneficial traits to agricultural crops. But it had mutated, jumping from plants to humans, carrying altered DNA that rewired neural pathways. The infection didn't kill its host, it reprogrammed them, using human bodies as mobile spore distribution systems. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. Our facility might have been ground zero, or at least an early contamination site. The experimental crops, the government visits, the first cases appearing in cities where we had shipped samples. The guilt was overwhelming. Had our work in preserving humanity's future accidentally triggered its downfall? With no contact from the outside world except fragmentary emergency broadcasts, I focused on making the facility secure and sustainable. The vault was designed for long-term operation, with supplies to maintain one staff member for approximately 3 months. The seed preservation systems were mostly automated, but required regular monitoring. As long as power remained stable, the seeds would remain viable in their carefully controlled environments. Power became my first concern when fluctuations increased that afternoon. The facility drew from the regional grid but had backup generators and even solar arrays on the disguised mountain peak above us. Yet something was affecting all systems intermittently. Each time the power dipped, emergency protocols rerouted electricity to critical preservation areas, leaving other sections in darkness for precious seconds. During one such fluctuation, I heard something I shouldn't have. A metallic clang from the lower maintenance level. A level that should have been completely empty. I armed myself with a fire axe from the emergency station and moved cautiously down the concrete stairs. The emergency lights cast long shadows as I checked each room. Storage, mechanical systems, water filtration, all empty. Then I heard labored breathing from inside the generator control room. I raised the axe, pushed the door open with my foot, and found myself face to face with Miguel. Not the infected version I'd seen on cameras, but Miguel himself, alive but badly injured, hidden in the shadows behind the backup generator. "Declan," he gasped, clutching a blood-soaked bandage on his shoulder. "Lock that door." I stood frozen, the axe still raised. "How are you here? I saw you outside. I saw you infected." Miguel shook his head weakly. "That wasn't me, that was Ramirez, my second shift. We look similar from a distance." He winced, adjusting his position. "Help me up. We don't have much time." I helped Miguel to the small medical bay 2 floors up. His uniform was torn, caked with dried blood, and his normally well-kept appearance had given way to a man who'd been through hell. The wound on his shoulder wasn't from a bullet as I'd first thought, it was a bite. Human-shaped but deeper than any normal bite should be. "How long?" I asked, gathering antiseptic and bandages. "About 6 hours," Miguel replied, his eyes constantly moving to the door. "I know what you're thinking, I've seen the movies too. But I'm still me, Declan. Still thinking clearly." I worked in silence, cleaning the wound while maintaining enough distance to react if needed. Miguel told me what happened outside, how Asheville had fallen in hours, not days. The hospital was overrun first, then police stations. Classic zombie scenario, except this was real, and the cause was something my work might have helped create. National Guard couldn't contain it, Miguel explained through gritted teeth as I applied antiseptic. The infected, they're not like in the movies, they run. They work together and they're changing. "Changing how?" I asked, securing a fresh bandage. "The newer ones are faster than the first wave. Learning from each other somehow." His eyes met mine, fear evident. "I fought off 3 of them getting back here, took a bite in the process, watched others turn within minutes of being bitten, but I'm still here, hours later." That detail struck me as significant. Why was Miguel's progression slower? I recalled the research notes I'd found earlier. The fungal agent affected neural pathways. What if some people had natural resistance, or what if... "Wait here," I told him, rushing to the research lab. I returned with a tray of plant extracts, specimens we were preserving for their antifungal properties. If my theory about the infection's nature was correct, these might help slow its progress. I combined extracts from 3 plant species that had evolved natural resistance to similar pathogens. The resulting liquid smelled bitter but not unpleasant. Miguel drank it without question, a man with nothing to lose. Within an hour, his fever dropped noticeably. The blackened veins that had begun spreading from his wound seemed to recede slightly. It wasn't a cure, but it was something. Evidence that botanical knowledge might be our greatest weapon against this outbreak. While Miguel rested, I returned to the security center to assess our situation. The cameras showed more infected gathering around the facility, at least 40 now, moving in that unsettling coordinated way. They seemed drawn to the building, though I couldn't determine why. Perhaps they sensed living humans inside, or perhaps something about the facility itself attracted them. I noticed patterns in their behavior. Loud noises would cause them to frenzy momentarily. They avoided direct sunlight where possible, clustering in shaded areas. Most importantly, they weren't mindless. When one would find a potential entry point, others would join the effort, taking turns testing different approaches. Their movements became more coordinated as hours passed. The first ones stumbled like drunks, but by nightfall, they were working together. Not like humans collaborate, but like ants following chemical signals. I documented everything, certain this information would be vital for anyone still fighting. The main power failed at approximately 7 in the evening, forcing a switch to emergency generators. Throughout the facility, non-essential systems shut down as power was rerouted to critical areas, primarily the seed preservation vaults. Each vault required precise temperature and humidity levels. Even minor fluctuations could damage the dormant life inside. I manually overrode several systems, prioritizing the most historically significant and potentially useful seed collections. Ancient grain varieties with natural disease resistance, medicinal plants with antiviral and antifungal properties, drought-resistant crops that could sustain survivors in a changed climate. Miguel joined me in the control room after a few hours of rest, moving more steadily than before. The treatment was working, at least temporarily. "You need to know what I found at the checkpoint," he said, placing a small flash drive on the console. Military was setting up containment zones before this hit the news. They knew something was coming. The drive contained classified documents, contingency, plans for a Class 1 biological event, with projections for infection rates and containment failures. Most disturbing was the date. The plans were finalized 2 weeks before the first cases were reported. Someone had anticipated this outbreak, or something very like it. "How did you get this?" I asked. "National Guard captain gave it to me. Said people needed to know the truth if containment failed." Miguel's expression darkened. They were shooting infected on sight, but also anyone they suspected might be exposed. No evacuations, no treatment efforts, just containment and termination. This information confirmed my worst fears. If the military response was already focused on containment rather than cure, the situation had been deemed uncontrollable from the start. We were on our own. Using the facility's emergency radio, we picked up scattered broadcasts throughout the night. Military safe zones established in key locations. Advice for survivors to stay put unless absolutely necessary to move. Rumors of a possible vaccine being developed at Fort Detrick, though details were vague and contradictory. 1. Transmission gave us hope. A research team at CDC headquarters had identified the pathogen and was working on treatment protocols. Their broadcast cut off mid-sentence and never resumed. By morning, Miguel's condition had deteriorated despite continued treatment. The black veins had returned, spreading from his shoulder toward his neck and chest. His temperature rose and fell in waves. During lucid periods, he helped me stabilize critical systems and plan potential evacuation routes. During fever spikes, he would become disoriented, once almost attacking me before regaining control. "You need to restrain me," he said during one clear moment. "I can feel it, Declan. Something rewiring my brain, changing how I think." I secured him to a chair in the medical bay with padded restraints designed for emergency psychiatric situations. He didn't resist. "The remedy slowed it down," he said, eyes clear and determined. "That means there's hope. But you have to promise to end it before I become one of them. I couldn't answer, focusing instead on preparing another dose of the plant extract. But we both knew the treatment was losing effectiveness. His body was adapting, or rather, the fungal infection was adapting his body to resist treatment. The second major power failure happened while I was in the medical bay. Emergency lights flashed as generators kicked in, but several systems remained dark. The environmental controls for 2 of the 5 main seed vaults stopped responding entirely. I had 15 minutes to save 10,000 years of agricultural heritage. Each seed bank section needed different temperature and humidity controls, all failing simultaneously. I ran to the control room, manually overriding safety protocols to reroute all available power to the most critical collections. Alarms blared as I made impossible choices: which collections to save, which to let go. Seeds collected from vanishing, rainforests, ancient grain varieties not cultivated for centuries, medicinal plants with compounds still being studied for cancer treatments. Each represented irreplaceable genetic diversity, humanity's insurance policy against catastrophe, a catastrophe that had already arrived. When I returned to the medical bay, Miguel was convulsing in his restraints. The blackened veins had reached, his face spreading like cracks in dried earth around his eyes. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw recognition, the real Miguel fighting to maintain control. "The notes," he gasped, nodding toward his discarded uniform jacket. "Inside pocket." They knew. They all knew. Then his eyes changed. The pupils expanded until there was almost no iris visible. His movements became rigid, precise, inhuman. The restraints, designed for a person trying to escape, proved inadequate for the inhuman strength now animating Miguel's body. The left restraint tore from its mounting. I won't describe what happened next in detail. I had promised Miguel. Despite everything happening outside, despite the world ending, that promise mattered. He deserved the dignity of having his final wish respected. Afterward, I found the notes in his jacket pocket. Unlike the flash drive with military contingency plans, these were research documents, detailed laboratory findings on the fungal agent now turning humans into infected. The pages confirmed everything. A modified ergot fungus engineered to improve crop resistance had mutated. It could move between plant and human hosts, carrying altered DNA that rewired neural pathways. They knew the risks. They did it anyway. More importantly, the notes contained information on partially successful treatment approaches, compounds that had shown promise in slowing progression. Many were derived from the same plant families I had intuitively selected for Miguel's treatment. This wasn't coincidence. The fungus had plant origins, so plants held the key to fighting it. The facility's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The emergency generators were designed for temporary operation, not sustained use. One by one, systems were failing as fuel reserves depleted. The seed preservation vaults, our entire reason for existing, were at critical risk. I made the decision. That would have been unthinkable days earlier. I would abandon the facility, not empty-handed but carrying the most valuable seeds, ones with potential treatment applications, and all the research materials I could transport. Using facility blueprints, I planned my evacuation route. The main entrance was surrounded by infected, but there was a maintenance tunnel that led to a ventilation shaft on the north side of the mountain. It hadn't been designed as an escape route, but it could function as one if I moved quickly and quietly. I modified our contamination suits using what I'd learned about the infected. They tracked by smell, so I created an olfactory camouflage from the same compounds plants use to deter fungal infections. I couldn't be certain it would work, but Miguel's temporary improvement suggested the approach had merit. The most difficult preparation was selecting which seeds to take. Each vault contained thousands of varieties, but I could only carry a fraction in specialized containers. I prioritized known antifungal species, focusing on varieties with documented resistance to ergot and related pathogens. I gathered essential research materials, Miguel's notes, my own observations, and data from our experiments. I packed a bye-bye tablet containing our digital archives, knowing that information might prove as valuable as the seeds themselves. Before leaving my office for the final time, I paused at the photo on my desk, my family at my sister's college graduation. My parents proudly flanking her, me standing awkwardly in too formal clothes. I removed it from the frame and placed it carefully in my breast pocket. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't face it without reminders of why I was fighting. The infected, surrounding the facility, provided one advantage. They had been stationary for hours, focused on the main entrance. Security camera footage showed their behavior had changed subtly. Instead of actively testing doors and windows, they now stood in almost reverent formation, as if waiting for something. This new behavior was unsettling, but potentially useful for my escape plan. I analyzed their patterns, looking for the safest moment to emerge. They responded to sound and movement, but they also followed each other. If I could lead the first ones away, the herd might follow, creating an opening for escape. The final system failure came sooner than expected. Lights flickered throughout the facility, and the environmental controls for all seed vaults shut down simultaneously. Without power, the sealed rooms would quickly reach ambient temperature, destroying centuries of careful preservation. There was no more time for planning or preparation. I sealed my contamination suit, packed my modified backpack with seed samples and research materials, and headed for the maintenance tunnel. As I crawled through the narrow passage, I tried not to think about what I was leaving behind. Not just seeds, but the world as I had known it. The maintenance tunnel was never meant for human passage. Designed for running cable and ventilation ducts, it averaged 3 feet in diameter, barely enough space to crawl through with my pack. The darkness was nearly absolute, my headlamp illuminating only a few feet ahead. Every scrape of my knee against concrete seemed thunderously loud. I'd memorized the route: 400 feet north, then a vertical shaft rising 80 feet to a ventilation outlet on the mountainside. The tunnel grew narrower as I progressed, forcing me to push my pack ahead rather than wearing it. Sweat soaked through my clothes despite the cool air, not from exertion, but from fear. Halfway through, I heard them. Not above or ahead, but inside the tunnel behind me. The scraping sounds of something crawling, something that shouldn't have known this exit existed. I moved faster, ignoring the pain as my shoulders scraped raw against concrete. The vertical shaft appeared ahead. A ladder bolted to the wall leading upward. I pushed my pack up first, then climbed as quietly as possible. The sounds below grew louder, multiple infected communicating with guttural clicks. They were coordinating, sharing information somehow. The shaft ended at a heavy metal grate. I braced my back against the opposite wall, planted my feet on the grate, and pushed with everything I had. It gave way suddenly, sending me sprawling onto forest floor outside. I pulled my pack through, then peered back down the shaft. Red eyes gleamed in the darkness below. Too close. I replaced the grate and wedged a broken branch through its handle, a temporary measure at best. Then I ran, keeping the facility's mountain at my back, heading deeper into the forest. The modified contamination suit felt bulky but provided both protection and camouflage. The plant-based compounds I'd applied gave off an odor imperceptible to humans, but designed to mask my presence from the infected. The first infected I encountered was a test of this theory. A solitary figure stood among the trees, swaying slightly. From its uniform, it had once been a park ranger. The blackened veins I'd observed in Miguel had spread throughout its exposed skin, creating patterns almost like tattoos beneath the surface. It sniffed the air as I approached, head tilting in, that unnatural angle I'd come to recognize. I froze, ready to run. But the infected turned away, apparently unable to detect me. The botanical formula worked, at least against this individual. I couldn't be certain it would work against groups or newer infected, but it was something. The forest had changed in just 2 days. Plants were growing with impossible speed, some with blackened veins like the infected. The fungus was spreading through everything, reshaping the world in its image. Pine trees leaked dark sap. Undergrowth grew in twisted, unnatural patterns. Yet some plants seemed resistant, thriving amid the corruption. I collected samples when possible, adding to my portable seed library. I hiked for hours, avoiding trails and roads where infected might congregate. From a ridge, I caught my first glimpse of the wider world. Asheville was partially visible in the distance, smoke rising. From multiple locations, no emergency vehicles moved on the highways. No aircraft in the sky. Just stillness and smoke. My destination was a fire watchtower, marked on forestry maps. Elevated, defensible, and likely abandoned in the chaos, it would provide temporary shelter and a vantage point for planning my next move. As darkness approached, I spotted its silhouette against the darkening sky, a solitary structure atop a cleared hill. The tower stood empty, its lower staircase retracted as a defensive measure by whoever had last occupied it. I found a winch, mechanism, and slowly cranked the stairs down, constantly scanning for movement in the surrounding forest. Once inside, I raised the stairs again and barricaded the trap door leading to the observation deck. The small cabin at the top contained basic emergency supplies and forestry equipment. A solar-powered radio sat on the desk, which I immediately tried. Most frequencies carried only static, but I found one broadcasting a repeating message. Military. Safe zone established at Asheville Regional Airport. All survivors proceed with caution. Infected concentrated in urban areas and spreading outward. The safe zone was approximately 20 miles southwest of my position, a journey that would take days on foot through increasingly dangerous territory. I needed rest and time to process what I'd learned before attempting such a trek. That night, I organized my salvaged materials and seeds. I had samples from 37 plant species with potential treatment applications. The research notes contained clues about which compounds might be most effective, but I needed laboratory facilities to test them properly. Using the tower's spotting scope, I surveyed the surroundings. The facility was invisible from this angle, hidden within its mountain. But the forest between my position and Asheville showed clear signs of infestation. Patches of vegetation had changed color, turning black or gray as the fungal agent spread through the ecosystem. Animals moved in unusual patterns, deer and smaller, mammals clustering in areas where plants remained healthy. Most concerning were the groups of infected moving through the forest. Not randomly, but in coordinated search patterns. They weren't shambling or stumbling. They moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to communicate through those clicking sounds I'd heard in the tunnel. Their behavior was becoming more organized, more intelligent with each hour. I slept fitfully, waking to every sound. Near dawn, a helicopter passed overhead, flying low toward Asheville. The first sign of organized human response I'd seen. I tried using a signal mirror to attract attention, but it was moving too fast, focused on its destination. With daylight, I continued documenting the plants around the tower. Those showing resistance to the fungal infection shared certain characteristics: high oil content in their leaves, naturally occurring antifungal compounds, or structural features that prevented spore penetration. I collected additional samples, refining my theories about potential treatments. The radio crackled intermittently with updates. The safe zone at the airport was holding, but under constant pressure from infected. Military personnel were conducting rescue operations in daylight hours only. A research team had been established to study the pathogen. Hope existed, however fragile. I spent 3 days at the tower, recovering strength and planning my route to the safe zone. Each day, the infected below grew more numerous and organized. They had established perimeters and patrols covering forest terrain with military precision. Their evolution was accelerating, far beyond what any zombie fiction had imagined. On the morning I planned to leave, the radio broadcast changed. Attention. All survivors. Research team requires individuals with agricultural or botanical expertise. Priority evacuation for those with relevant knowledge. Respond on emergency channel with credentials. I almost laughed at the cosmic timing. After 15 years of working in obscurity, my specialized knowledge was suddenly humanity's most valuable asset. I activated the radio's transmitter and responded with my credentials. Within an hour, I received coordinates for a pickup point, 5 miles south, a Forest Service road wide enough for helicopter landing. The journey would still be dangerous, but now I had a specific destination and the promise of extraction. I packed carefully, leaving behind anything non-essential to travel light and fast. The plant-based camouflage had proven effective, but I refreshed it with new compounds, layering different scents to confuse the infected's evolving senses. Moving through the forest required constant vigilance. I documented new behaviors among the infected. They were establishing territories, marking boundaries with secretions that reeked of the same compounds found in the blackened plants. Some carried crude tools, not weapons but implements for spreading spores, broken branches used to scratch fungal growth onto healthy trees, spreading the infection throughout the ecosystem. Each survivor I encountered along the way had a different story, but the pattern was clear. Those with regular exposure to certain plants showed more resistance. The greenhouse workers, the herbalists, the gardeners lasted longer when infected. This confirmed my hypothesis about plant-derived compounds offering protection, not just camouflage. 4 miles from the extraction point, I encountered a group of survivors, a family of 5 led by a former botany professor from UNC Asheville. Professor Harriet Chen had reached the same conclusions I had, independently developing plant-based compounds to mask human scent. We shared information, combining our knowledge to improve both our formulations. The fungus is evolving rapidly, Chen explained as we traveled together. But it's still fundamentally a plant pathogen that jumped to humans. Its mechanisms can be countered using the same natural defenses plants have developed over millions of years. Her teenage son added, "Mom says it's like a war that's been going on since before dinosaurs. Fungi trying to consume, plants evolving to resist. We're just the new battlefield." An uncomfortably accurate assessment from someone so young. We reached the extraction point an hour before the scheduled pickup. The Forest Service road was overgrown but still visible from the air. We established a perimeter, using plant-based repellents to create a defensive boundary. Chen's compounds complemented mine. Hers focused on masking human scent, while mine contained compounds toxic to the specific fungal strain. The helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, a military Black Hawk descending into the small clearing. As we boarded, I saw the infected emerging from the tree line, drawn by the noise despite our botanical barriers. They moved differently than those I'd observed earlier, faster, more coordinated, almost elegant in their predatory approach. One locked eyes with me as the helicopter lifted off. Its gaze held something that sent chills through my body. Not just hunger or aggression, but recognition, calculation, intelligence. The fungus wasn't just controlling human bodies, it was utilizing human brains, adapting and learning with each new host. The flight to Asheville Regional Airport took less than 15 minutes. Below, the landscape revealed the extent of the catastrophe. Abandoned vehicles clogged highways, fires burned unchecked in residential areas, and everywhere the infected moved in coordinated groups, thousands strong in some areas. The airport had been transformed into a fortified compound. Military barriers surrounded the perimeter, with armed personnel at regular intervals. Inside, emergency shelters housed survivors while makeshift laboratories had been established in the terminal buildings. I was escorted directly to the research team upon landing. The lead scientist, Dr. Alara Williams, had been part of the CDC's emergency response team. She examined my samples and notes with increasing excitement. "This confirms our working hypothesis," she said, comparing Miguel's notes to their findings. The pathogen originated as an agricultural modification that mutated beyond its designed parameters. Your plant-based treatments align perfectly with our most promising avenues of research. I joined their team immediately, working alongside researchers from across the medical and biological spectrum. We focused on 3 parallel tracks: developing more effective repellents to protect survivor groups, creating treatments to slow progression in the recently infected, and searching for potential cures or vaccines. The work was promising but hampered by limited resources. Many critical compounds were unavailable, equipment failed without replacement parts, and the safe zone itself was under constant pressure, requiring regular defense and evacuation of compromised sections. After 2 weeks of intensive research, we achieved our first significant breakthrough. a compound derived from a rare fungus-resistant. Orchid showed the ability to temporarily reverse neural changes in recently infected test subjects. The effect lasted only hours before the fungal agent adapted, but it provided the first real evidence that the process could be interrupted. Dr. Williams called a meeting of the research team to discuss next steps. "This proves the concept," she said, displaying brain scans of treated subjects. "But we need more potent compounds and a delivery method that the fungus can't adapt to so quickly." I studied the molecular structure on the screen, recognizing similarities to compounds I'd helped document years earlier. "There's a seed vault in the Rocky Mountains," I said. "Fort Collins, Colorado. It contains ancient grain varieties naturally resistant to the fungal precursor. Their defense mechanisms evolved over thousands of years, making adaptation much more difficult for the pathogen." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The Colorado facility might contain the raw materials for a more permanent solution. Not just treatment, but potentially a cure. But reaching it would require crossing nearly 2,000 miles of infected territory. Dr. Williams looked at me steadily. "How certain are you that these varieties would be effective?" "Their resistance mechanisms target the fungal reproductive cycle at multiple points," I explained. "Modern crops lost these defenses through selective breeding for yield and taste, but the ancient varieties stored in Fort Collins would have intact defense systems evolved specifically against ergot family fungi." The military commander overseeing the safe zone joined our discussion. Colonel Reyes had been fighting a losing battle to maintain the perimeter as infected numbers grew. "We have a transport plane capable of reaching Colorado," he said, "but runway conditions there are unknown. It would be a one-way trip for whoever goes, with no guarantee of extraction." "I'll go," I said without hesitation. "I'm familiar with the facility's systems. If it's still operational, I can access the secure vaults and identify the varieties we need." Professor Chen volunteered to join me, along with 2 military personnel with agricultural backgrounds. Colonel Reyes approved the mission with one condition. If we couldn't return with the seeds, we would need to transmit their genetic information digitally, requiring us to establish communication from the Colorado facility. We spent 3 days preparing, gathering equipment, and refining our botanical protections based on our latest research. The infected were evolving rapidly, with each new generation showing greater resistance to our countermeasures. Time was running critically short. The night before our scheduled departure, I visited the medical section where recently infected were being studied. Behind isolation glass, 20 individuals in various stages of transformation were housed. Some still appeared mostly human, able to communicate despite blackened veins spreading visibly beneath their skin. Others had progressed further, their movements becoming mechanical, their eyes displaying that unsettling awareness I'd seen during our helicopter extraction. Dr. Williams joined me, her exhaustion evident. "We're seeing something unprecedented," she said quietly. "The fungus isn't just controlling them, it's networking them, connected intelligence that grows with each new host." "Like a mycelial network in forest ecosystems," I replied, thinking of how fungi connect trees in nature, allowing them to communicate and share resources, but using human neural pathways instead of root systems. "Exactly, and it's accelerating. The newer infected show coordination that suggests they're not just sharing information, they're functioning as specialized components in a larger organism." The implications were terrifying. Not just zombies, but a distributed intelligence, using human hosts as its physical form. An intelligence that was learning, adapting, and expanding with every person it consumed. "We leave at dawn," I told her. "If the Colorado vault is intact, we'll have what we need to fight this effectively." She nodded, her expression grim. "The runway here will be compromised within days. This mission may be our last chance to get the materials we need before we're completely cut off." I spent that night reviewing everything we knew about the Colorado facility. Built into a mountainside like the Appalachian Repository, it contained one of the world's most complete collections of ancient grain varieties. Its remote location offered hope that it might have escaped the worst of the outbreak. But there was no way to know for certain until we arrived. As I prepared for sleep, I thought of Miguel and his final moments of clarity, of my sister whose fate remained unknown, of the researchers who had engineered this disaster, perhaps with the best intentions. Seeds meant to feed humanity had instead unleashed its greatest threat. Now different seeds might offer salvation, if we could reach them in time. The mission would be dangerous beyond measure, but there was no alternative. The botanical knowledge I dedicated my life to preserving had never been more critical, not just for future generations, but for humanity's immediate survival. The C-130 transport plane took off at dawn, its engines straining against the weight of equipment and supplies we'd packed for the mission. Professor Chen sat beside me, reviewing facility blueprints and security protocols for the Colorado Seed Vault. Across from us, Sergeant Rivera and Specialist Patel, our military escorts with agricultural backgrounds, checked their weapons and communications equipment. "Time to Colorado?" I asked the pilot through my headset. "4 hours if the weather holds," he replied. "We've plotted a course to avoid major population centers, less chance of encountering airborne contaminants that way." The theory that spores might be carried on wind currents remained controversial among researchers, but no one wanted to risk it. The modified fungus had already demonstrated capabilities beyond anything we'd anticipated. As we gained altitude, I looked out over what remained of Asheville. Fires still burned in some areas, but most of the city had gone dark. The infected moved through streets in organized patterns, clearing structures and establishing what looked like cultivation areas in parks and open spaces. They weren't just spreading the infection, they were farming it. Our flight path took us over the Appalachians, then across Tennessee and the Midwest. Below us, the landscape told a consistent story. Cities in chaos, rural areas less affected but showing spreading patterns of contamination. Agricultural regions exhibited strange coloration from above, entire fields turning black as crops succumbed to the fungal agent. Professor Chen pointed to a particularly massive field in what must have been Kansas. "Look at the pattern," she said. "The infection is spreading in concentric circles, but some sections remain green. Those must be naturally resistant crop varieties." "Or deliberately planted test areas," I suggested, remembering the government research that had preceded the outbreak. The timing of this wasn't accidental. They were testing controlled release in isolated agricultural zones first. That reality had become increasingly clear as we pieced together information from various sources. The outbreak hadn't been a simple lab accident, but the result of systematic field testing gone catastrophically wrong. Someone had believed they could control the spread, containing it to designated test areas before a planned rollout of resistant crops. At the midpoint of our journey, the pilot's voice came through our headsets. "Approaching Denver airspace. No response from air traffic control. We're seeing significant ground movement in the metropolitan area." I moved to the cockpit to observe. Denver sprawled below, its eastern suburbs obscured by what I initially thought was smoke. The pilot handed me binoculars, and I realized what I was seeing. Massive swarms of infected, tens of thousands strong, moving in spiral patterns through the city streets. They flowed like liquid, coordinated in ways that defied explanation. "Altitude?" I asked. 27,000 feet, well above any possible contamination, the pilot assured me. "But I'm concerned about our landing zone. Fort Collins is just north of this." I returned to my seat, sharing what I'd seen with the others. Fort Collins housed Colorado State University with its world-class agricultural research facilities alongside the seed vault we sought. If Denver had fallen so completely, our destination might already be compromised. Professor Chen studied satellite imagery on her tablet. "The seed vault is here," she indicated a point in the foothills west of the city. "Separate from the university campus, more isolated. That's our only advantage," I said. These facilities were designed to operate independently, with minimal staff. If the security protocols were enacted early enough, the vault might have been sealed before infection spread. 2 hours later, we began our descent toward a small airstrip 10 miles from the seed vault facility. The pilot circled once, assessing conditions below. The airstrip appeared intact with no visible infected nearby. but the surrounding area showed the now familiar signs of fungal spread in the vegetation. "I can put you down, but taking off again might be impossible," he warned. "Runway is shorter than ideal, and I'm seeing what looks like structural damage at the north end." "Can you wait for us?" Sergeant Rivera asked. The pilot shook his head. "Fuel constraints. I can give you 24 hours maximum before I need to return to Asheville." With or without you. We exchanged glances, all understanding what this meant. The mission had just become potentially one way. We'd need to find alternative transport back, or survive long enough for extraction to be arranged, if the safe zone at Asheville even existed by then. The landing was rough but successful. We unloaded our equipment quickly, protective gear enhanced with our latest botanical formulations, sample collection kits, communications equipment, and weapons. The pilot promised to return the following day at the same time, but his expression betrayed doubt. As the plane took off, leaving us in suddenly deafening silence, I felt the weight of our isolation. We were over 1,000 miles from the nearest known survivor community, in territory that was effectively unmapped in terms of infection density. We established a temporary base in the airstrip's small control tower, setting up communications equipment and planning our approach to the seed vault. Satellite imagery showed the most direct route, but also concerning movement patterns in the urban areas we would need to skirt. "The infected are concentrating around institutional buildings," Professor Chen noted, indicating clusters around hospitals, government facilities, and research centers, as if they're targeting information sources, or following programmed behavior from their previous human lives, Specialist Patel suggested, returning to places of significance. Something about their distribution troubled me, but we had no time to analyze further. We needed to reach the vault before dark, when the infected became more active. We moved out in formation with military escorts taking front and rear positions. The plant-based repellents we'd applied gave off a barely perceptible bitter scent, the latest formula designed to confuse rather than repel, making us effectively invisible to infected senses rather than obviously wrong. The countryside showed disturbing transformation. Plants grew in unnatural configurations, some reaching impossible sizes for their species. Others had withered entirely, replaced by blackened fungal growths that pulsated subtly. Wildlife had either fled or transformed. We spotted deer with fungal growths erupting from their hides, birds with malformed wings circling in perfect geometric patterns. We avoided roads and stayed within cover where possible. But 3 miles from the airstrip, we encountered our first infected. A group of 5 stood in a clearing, completely motionless. Unlike any infected I'd previously observed, these weren't wandering or hunting. They stood in a precise pentagon formation, faces tilted toward the sun, blackened veins pulsing visibly across their exposed skin. We froze, waiting to see if our camouflage would hold. The infected remained motionless, apparently unaware of our presence. Then, without warning, all 5 turned their heads simultaneously to stare directly at our position. "They can see us," Rivera whispered, raising his weapon. "Wait," I said, studying their behavior. "They're not approaching." The infected continued, staring but made no move toward us. After several tense minutes, they resumed their original positions, faces to the sun. We carefully circled wide around them and continued toward our objective. "What were they doing?" Patel asked when we were safely distant. "Photosynthesis," Professor Chen replied grimly. The fungal structures were positioned to maximize sun exposure. They're generating energy, just like plants. The implication was staggering. The infected weren't just hosts. They were being repurposed at a cellular level, transformed into something that combined features of fungi, plants, and animals. A hybrid organism using human bodies as its infrastructure. We encountered similar groups 3 more times before reaching the outskirts of Fort Collins. Each time the infected detected our presence but made no move to attack or follow. It was as if they had been assigned different functions, and we weren't relevant to their current task. The city itself appeared largely abandoned, with minimal movement visible. Buildings showed signs of the hasty evacuation, doors left open, vehicles abandoned mid-street. But unlike other urban areas we'd observed, there was no extensive fire damage or signs of massive conflict. It was as if the population had simply disappeared. The seed vault facility came into view as we crested a small rise west of the city. Built into the foothills, its entrance resembled a concrete bunker with minimal external infrastructure. Solar arrays covered much of the surrounding hillside, feeding independent power systems within. "No infected visible," Rivera reported after scanning the approach through binoculars. "But the main entrance appears sealed." This was expected. Lockdown protocols would have automatically sealed external access points. I studied the facility. Layout. There's a maintenance entrance on the north side, emergency access only, with separate authentication systems. We approached cautiously, alert for any movement. The facility's external sensors would have detected us already if systems were still operational. The lack of automated response suggested power issues or more concerning problems. The maintenance entrance was located behind a concealed panel in a retaining wall. I entered my authentication code on the keypad, followed by the emergency override sequence I'd memorized from our preparation materials. Nothing happened. "Manual override required," I explained, locating the physical access panel beneath. Using tools from my pack, I removed the cover and engaged the emergency crank mechanism. After several minutes of effort, the heavy door began to slide open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. "Power's out," Professor Chen observed. "Backup systems should have engaged." We activated headlamps and moved inside, the military personnel taking lead positions with weapons ready. The air smelled stale but clean, without the distinctive fungal odor we'd come to associate with infected areas. The corridor led to a security checkpoint with another sealed door. "Manual override won't work here," I said, examining the systems. "We need to restore at least partial power to access the main facility." The generator room was adjacent to the security checkpoint. Inside, emergency lighting still functioned, casting weak red illumination across sophisticated equipment. The main generators sat silent, but diagnostic panels showed green status indicators. "They're operational," I said, checking the systems. "Just not activated. Something interrupted the automatic transfer sequence." Working through the restart procedures, I managed to initiate the backup power systems. Lights flickered on throughout. The visible corridors and the security door systems hummed back to life. Using my emergency credentials, I accessed the security terminal. "Facility status shows complete lockdown initiated 43 days ago," I reported, scanning the logs. "All personnel evacuated through emergency protocols. Seed vault environmental systems operating on minimal power to maintain viability." "Any breach indicators?" Rivera asked. I checked the security logs carefully. None detected. The facility appears intact and uncompromised. It seemed almost too fortunate. This critical facility had successfully locked down before infection reached it. The seeds we needed might all be viable, preserved in their carefully controlled environments. We proceeded through the security checkpoint into the main facility. Unlike the Appalachian repository I'd worked in, this installation was larger and more advanced, with multiple research laboratories surrounding the central seed storage vaults. The layout indicated a facility that didn't just preserve seeds but actively studied them. "We need to access the primary database," I explained, leading the way to the central control room. "That will tell us exactly where to find the varieties we need." The control room contained dozens of monitoring stations for the various vault environments. I located the master terminal and entered my credentials, hoping they would be recognized across facilities. After tense moments, the system granted access. "Searching for ergot-resistant heritage grain varieties," I said, typing commands into the database. The results appeared almost immediately, a comprehensive catalog of over 300 grain varieties with natural resistance mechanisms to fungal pathogens in the ergot family. "They're in Vault 7, I announced, highlighting the location on the facility map. "Climate-controlled storage, sub-zero temperatures to maintain dormancy." Professor Chen was already examining the research database on another terminal. "Declan, look at this," she said, voice tight with urgency. Research files on the exact fungal strain we're dealing with. dated 8 months before the outbreak. I joined her, scanning the information on screen. The files detailed experimental work on modified ergot strains designed for agricultural applications, the same research that had preceded the outbreak. But there was more. Documentation of unexpected mutations observed during controlled growth studies, warnings about extraordinary adaptation rates, recommendations to terminate the project due to containment concerns, recommendations that had clearly been ignored. They knew, Chen whispered. They knew exactly how dangerous this was, and they proceeded anyway. More importantly, I said, pointing to a section of data, they were already working on countermeasures, using compounds derived from the same heritage grains we came for. The research files contained preliminary formulations for compounds that inhibited the modified fungus at multiple stages of its life cycle. The scientists had recognized the potential danger and developed contingency treatments even as the project continued forward under government mandate. We need these research files as much as the seeds themselves, I said, initiating a data transfer to our secure drives. They already did much of the work we're attempting now. While the data transferred, we proceeded to Vault 7. The massive steel door responded to my authorized access, sliding open to reveal a room maintained at precise sub-zero temperatures. Inside, thousands of seed samples were stored in specialized containers, each labeled with complete genetic information. Working quickly in the cold environment, we identified and collected samples from all 300 resistant varieties. Each seed represented genetic information evolved over thousands of years, natural defense mechanisms refined through countless generations of exposure to fungal threats. We should check the laboratories, Professor Chen suggested as we finished securing the samples. If they were actively researching these countermeasures, they might have materials we can use immediately, not just seeds for future cultivation. The research wing contained 6 specialized laboratories. 5 showed signs of orderly shutdown, equipment cleaned and secured, materials properly stored. But the 6th lab was different. Emergency containment protocols had been activated, sealing it behind additional security barriers. Containment breach recorded, I said, checking the security logs. 7 weeks ago, just days before the facility lockdown. Can we access it safely? Rivera asked. I studied the containment procedures. The lab has been sealed and subjected to sterilization protocols. According to logs, all biological material should have been neutralized, but we should use maximum protection. We donned additional protective gear from emergency storage before overriding the containment barriers. Inside, the laboratory showed signs of hasty evacuation. Equipment left running, notes scattered across workstations. Most concerning was a sealed growth chamber in the center of the room, its glass surfaces coated with a familiar black residue. From within, "This is where it started," Professor Chen said, examining the chamber without touching it. Patient 0 wasn't a person. It was a laboratory sample. The research notes confirmed her assessment. Scientists had been working directly with the modified fungal strain, testing its interactions with various plant species. An unexpected mutation had occurred, producing airborne spores with unprecedented mobility. Containment had failed before. Anyone recognized the danger. The infection hadn't begun with government field tests as we'd speculated. It had escaped from this laboratory, spreading silently for weeks before the first human cases were identified. By then, it had already established itself in multiple ecosystems, adapting and evolving beyond anyone's ability to control. Most valuable among the laboratory materials were prototype treatment compounds, formulations developed to counter the fungus if containment failed. These weren't just theoretical. They had been synthesized and tested, showing promising results before the evacuation. This changes everything, I said, carefully securing the compound samples. We don't just have genetic material for future development. We have working prototypes that could be immediately reproduced. Our mission had succeeded beyond expectations, but a new problem emerged. The amount of material we'd discovered exceeded our carrying capacity. The seeds alone filled our specialized containers. The research files required multiple storage drives, and the prototype compounds needed careful handling to remain viable. We can't possibly transport all of this ourselves, Chen said, stating the obvious concern. Sergeant Rivera studied the facility maps. There's a motor pool connected to the loading docks. If any vehicles remain, we could dramatically increase our transport capacity. It was worth investigating. We secured our collected materials in the control room and proceeded to the facilities management section. The motor pool contained 4 vehicles, 2 standard government SUVs, a maintenance truck, and a specialized transport van designed for moving sensitive biological materials. All had keys available in the security office. We can use the transport van for the prototype compounds, I suggested. The environmental controls are designed specifically for biological samples. These change our extraction plans, Rivera noted. We can't all fit in the plane with this much material. Some of us will need to attempt ground transport back to Asheville. It was a daunting prospect, driving over 1,000 miles through infected territory. But the alternative meant leaving behind materials that could save countless lives. We had to try. We spent hours organizing the materials, prioritizing what would return on the aircraft versus ground transport. The most critical items, seed samples and prototype compounds, would fly back with Professor Chen. The remaining research materials and equipment would travel by road with the rest of us. As evening approached, we established secure sleeping areas within the facility. For the first time since the outbreak began, I felt real hope. We had found not just the seeds we sought, but actual treatment prototypes and comprehensive research data. The fungal nightmare might still be contained. I reviewed the research files while others prepared our transportation. The scientists here had been closer to understanding the modified fungus than anyone realized. They had documented its extraordinary ability to integrate with host organisms, rewriting genetic information to serve its spread. But they had also identified its weaknesses, specific compounds that disrupted its reproductive cycle and neutralized its ability to override host neural systems. Most importantly, they had recognized something we had only begun to suspect. The fungus wasn't just creating individual infected, it was building a network, a collective intelligence distributed across all infected organisms. Plant, animal, or human, all were becoming components in a vast conscious entity that was rapidly learning and evolving. This wasn't just an outbreak. It was the emergence of something entirely new. And we had just found the tools that might stop it before it consumed everything. Morning came with an unexpected complication. Our communication equipment detected a weather system moving rapidly eastward, a spring storm that would make aircraft landing at our remote airstrip impossible. The pilot confirmed via radio that he could attempt an early extraction, or would need to delay by at least 48 hours. We need to move now, I told the team after conferring with Professor Chen. The treatment prototypes have limited stability outside controlled conditions. Every hour reduces their efficacy. The decision was made quickly. Chen and Specialist Patel would take the most essential materials to the airstrip immediately for early extraction. Sergeant Rivera and I would follow with the transport van containing the remaining samples and research materials, attempting the ground journey back to Asheville. We loaded the vehicles and performed final checks of the facility, ensuring we had overlooked nothing of value. The seed vault would remain secure after our departure, its automated systems maintaining the remaining collections until someone could return, if anyone ever did. The prototypes should arrive at Asheville by afternoon, Chen said as we prepared to part ways. Dr. Williams has the equipment to begin synthesis immediately. If all goes well, they could have initial treatment batches ready within days. Assuming the safe zone still exists, Rivera noted soberly. We had received no communication from Asheville since landing in Colorado. The silence could indicate nothing more than equipment limitations, but we all recognized the possibility that the perimeter had been breached, the research team scattered or worse. I embraced Professor Chen before she departed, this brilliant woman I'd known for mere weeks, but with whom I'd entrusted humanity's best hope. Get those seeds to Williams, I told her. The ancient varieties are the key. They've been fighting this battle far longer than we have. Chen and Patel left for the airstrip, taking the SUV for its better off-road capabilities. Rivera and I finalized our preparations for the much longer journey ahead. The specialized transport van was well equipped, with reinforced construction and independent power systems for the sample storage compartments. We added additional supplies from the facility, food, water, and most importantly, materials to refresh our botanical protections against the infected. Best route? Rivera asked as we studied maps spread across the facility's conference table. Interstate highways would be fastest but likely most dangerous near urban centers, I replied. Secondary roads through rural areas might offer safer passage, but significantly increase travel time. We plotted a compromise route, following major highways where they bypassed cities, transitioning to secondary roads when necessary to avoid metropolitan areas. The journey would take at least 5 days if everything went perfectly, which seemed unlikely given what we'd seen of the transformed landscape. Before departing, I made a final sweep of the research laboratories, gathering any overlooked materials that might prove useful. In the primary researcher's office, I discovered a personal journal hidden in a desk drawer. Unlike the formal research notes we'd already collected, these were observations, theories, and fears recorded outside official channels. The entries confirmed our worst suspicions. The fungal modification project had been accelerated despite safety concerns, pushed forward by government agencies seeking agricultural applications that could withstand climate-changed conditions. The containment breach hadn't been immediately reported, allowing the pathogen nearly 2 weeks of unmonitored spread before authorities were notified. Most disturbingly, the researcher had documented early cases that preceded the official outbreak. Maintenance, workers exhibiting unusual symptoms, wildlife behaving strangely around the facility. The warning signs had been recognized but dismissed, sacrificed to project timelines and budget considerations. I added the journal to our collection of materials and joined Rivera at the transport van. As we prepared to leave the relative safety of the seed vault, I couldn't help feeling we were venturing into territory that had transformed beyond recognition during our brief time inside. "Ready?" Rivera asked, checking his weapon one final time. I nodded, securing my safety harness. "Let's find out what the world looks like now." We departed through the facility's main vehicle entrance, the massive doors sealing automatically behind us. The morning light revealed a landscape subtly changed from our arrival. New growth had appeared overnight, blackened vines crawling. Across structures, unusual fungal formations sprouting from soil. The infection was spreading visibly, hour by hour. Our route took us along the western edge of Fort Collins, avoiding the central city where we'd observed infected concentrations. The suburban areas appeared largely abandoned, with occasional movement visible within structures but few infected. On the streets, different behavior pattern here compared to the East Coast, Rivera observed as we passed through a neighborhood of empty homes. Less aggression, more systematic activity. He was right. The infected we glimpsed through windows weren't wandering or hunting. They were methodically transforming their environments, removing furniture to create open spaces where fungal gardens now grew across floors and walls. Less like zombies, more like workers in some alien hive. We maintained strict silence as we traveled relying on our botanical camouflage rather than speed for protection. The compounds derived from resistant plants had proven effective thus far, but we refreshed them regularly, uncertain how quickly the fungal intelligence might adapt to recognize our countermeasures. The first major challenge came at the interstate, junction south of Fort Collins. What should have been an empty highway on-ramp was instead occupied by a structured arrangement of infected, dozens standing in concentric circles around a central figure who appeared more extensively transformed than the others. "Some kind of gathering," I whispered, observing through binoculars from a safe distance. The central figure has more extensive fungal growth, almost looks like a fruiting body. Rivera studied the formation with professional assessment. They're positioned to block all access points, almost like a checkpoint. We couldn't risk confrontation with so many infected in an organized formation. Instead, we backtracked to find an alternative route, adding hours to our journey but avoiding detection. This pattern would repeat itself many times in the days ahead, planned routes blocked by infected gatherings, forcing detours through increasingly difficult terrain. By evening of the first day, we had covered less than 200 miles, far below our target pace. We established a secure location for the night in an abandoned ranger station within Pike National Forest. The isolated structure showed no signs of infected activity, and its elevated position gave us clear sight lines in all directions. "I'll take first watch," Rivera offered, positioning himself by the windows with his rifle. "You should review those research materials while we have time. Anything that helps us understand what we're seeing out there could save our lives." I spent hours studying the collected notes and data, piecing together a clearer picture of what we faced. The modified fungus wasn't just spreading, it was terraforming, reshaping environments to better support its continued expansion. The infected humans were tools in this process, their intelligence and physical capabilities repurposed to serve fungal objectives. Most concerning were indications that the network was developing specialized functions. Some infected appeared to serve as scouts, others as builders, still others as what could only be described as cultivation specialists, tending to fungal growths with the care of gardeners. This specialization suggested an intelligence far beyond mindless spread. The fungal collective was organizing itself with purpose. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by strange sounds from the forest around us. Not the movement of infected, but the forest itself changing. Plants growing with audible creaks, root systems shifting beneath the soil. The living world was being remade hour by hour. Dawn revealed the extent of overnight transformation. What had been normal forest the previous evening now contained structures never seen in nature, arch-like formations of intertwined plants, blackened vines creating geometric patterns between trees, fungal growths pulsating with inner light. "It's communicating through the ecosystem," I realized, watching patterns of movement spread through the transformed vegetation, using plants as a network to coordinate infected activity. This explained how the infected could organize so effectively across distances. They weren't just individually controlled by the fungus, they were connected through the environmental changes the fungus created around them. An entire parallel nervous system spread across the landscape. We departed quickly, unwilling to remain in the rapidly transforming forest. Our route that day took us across eastern Colorado toward the Kansas border. The plains should have offered easier travel than mountain roads, but instead presented new challenges. Vast agricultural areas had been converted to fungal production, with infected tending enormous fields now growing blackened crops. These areas proved impossible to navigate directly, too open, too heavily populated with infected workers. We were forced to skirt their edges, adding many miles to our journey. By midday, we received confirmation that Professor Chen's team had successfully reached the Asheville safe zone with the critical materials. The extraction had gone smoothly, and Dr. Williams had already begun work with the prototype compounds. This news should have been purely encouraging, but it came with a disturbing update. The Asheville perimeter had contracted significantly since our departure, with infected numbers growing exponentially outside the barriers. Military personnel were preparing for a potential full evacuation to a secondary location further east, one better situated for coastal extraction if necessary. "We're running out of safe places," Rivera said after we processed this information, "and we're still 1,000 miles out." The remainder of that day and the next two followed similar patterns. Planned routes blocked by infected activity, detours adding time and distance, increasingly transformed landscapes challenging navigation. We maintained our protection protocols rigorously, refreshing botanical compounds and minimizing exposure. On the fourth day, in western Missouri, we encountered the first evidence of organized human resistance. A barricaded community had established itself around a small rural airport, with armed sentries positioned along reinforced fencing. They initially mistook us for infected training weapons on our vehicle until we clearly identified ourselves. The community's leader, a former Air Force colonel named Harrington, welcomed us once our identity was confirmed. Their settlement housed approximately 200 survivors, many with military or agricultural backgrounds. They had discovered similar botanical protections independently, using local plant species with natural fungal resistance. "We've been observing the infected establishing territories," Harrington explained, showing us their hand-drawn maps of activity patterns. They're creating boundaries, defending resources. Different groups show different behaviors, almost like competing colonies. This matched our observations but added new concerns. If the fungal network was developing distinct factions, it suggested even more complex organization than we'd feared. Perhaps multiple collective intelligences emerging from the same basic pathogen. We shared information about the treatment prototypes and seed samples being analyzed in Asheville. Harrington's community had rudimentary laboratory facilities that might be capable of synthesizing treatments if they received the formulation data. We established communication protocols that would allow Asheville to transmit this information when treatments were confirmed effective. After resupplying and refreshing our botanical protections with local variants, we continued eastward. Harrington provided updated intelligence on infected concentrations ahead, allowing us to plan more effective routes through Missouri and Illinois. The landscape continued its eerie transformation. In some areas, the fungal growth had created structures that resembled architecture, curved arches, chambered spaces, even primitive road systems used by infected for transportation. It was as if the collective intelligence was recreating human infrastructure for its own purposes, learning from the memories of its hosts. We observed infected engaging in increasingly sophisticated behaviors. Some appeared to be conducting experiments, exposing different materials to fungal spores, observing reactions, adjusting conditions. Others worked in coordinated teams to redirect water flows, creating irrigation for fungal growth fields. Most disturbing were groups that seemed to be actively hunting uninfected wildlife, not for consumption, but for deliberate infection and release. Our progress remained slower than hoped, with each day bringing new obstacles. By the sixth day of travel, we had reached central Tennessee, still hundreds of miles from Asheville, but at least within emergency aircraft range if extraction became necessary. It was here that we received the most promising news since beginning our journey. Dr. Williams had successfully synthesized treatments using the prototype compounds and seed extracts. Initial trials on recently infected patients showed significant regression of symptoms with neural function partially restored in some cases. The treatment wasn't a complete cure, but it provided valuable time, slowing progression from hours to days or even weeks. Most importantly, the fungal agent showed difficulty adapting to the compound combinations derived from ancient grain varieties. Just as we had theorized, these plants had developed complex defense mechanisms through millennia of coevolution with fungal pathogens. Their genetic tools for resistance were too sophisticated for even this modified strain to quickly overcome. Production had begun on larger treatment batches, with distribution to other surviving safe zones the next priority. Our mission, against all odds, had provided humanity its first real defense against the fungal apocalypse. We continued eastward with renewed determination, knowing that every hour brought more treatment doses to those who needed them. The Tennessee mountains presented familiar terrain, similar to western North Carolina where our journey had begun. But the transformation here was more advanced than anything we'd seen, with entire mountain slopes covered in geometric fungal structures visible for miles. The infected populations had also evolved, showing more extensive physical modifications than earlier encounters. Some had developed growth patterns that served specific functions, elongated limbs for reaching high places, hardened extrusions that worked as tools, even rudimentary gliding membranes stretched between arms and torsos. For rapid movement down slopes, we were witnessing accelerated evolution, the fungal intelligence redesigning its human hosts to better serve its expanding needs. Each generation of infected showed greater specialization and efficiency. What might they become in months or years, if left unchecked? On the 8th day, we crossed into North Carolina, less than 200 miles from Asheville. Regular communication with the safe zone provided guidance through areas of heavy infected activity. Military reconnaissance had mapped major concentrations, allowing us to plan the safest possible approach. The final stretch would be the most dangerous. Infected had completely surrounded the Asheville safe zone, with density increasing closer to the perimeter. Our botanical camouflage had remained effective thus far, but we would be testing its limits against the highest concentration of infected we'd yet encountered. That night, camped in an abandoned fire tower with our destination visible as distant lights on the horizon, Rivera and I discussed the changed world we'd traveled through. "It's not trying to kill us," I said, articulating the conclusion I'd reached over thousands of observed miles. "It's trying to absorb us, make us part of itself." Rivera nodded slowly. "Not an infection, a conversion, turning humans into components of something larger." "A planetary-scale organism," I agreed, "using our intelligence, our infrastructure, our capabilities to expand itself. If it succeeds completely, Earth becomes something else entirely. And the treatments we brought back, will they be enough?" I considered this carefully. They'll buy time, slow the spread, give us space to develop more permanent solutions. But the fungus is still out there in the wild, still evolving. This is just the first countermove in a very long game. The following morning we began our final approach to Asheville. Military escorts met us 50 miles out, providing armed accompaniment through increasingly dangerous territory. The infected here moved with purpose, many carrying improvised tools or weapons. They had learned from their encounters with military forces, adapting tactics to counter human defenses. As we neared the airport safe zone, I witnessed the full extent of the fungal siege. Thousands of infected surrounded the perimeter, not attacking randomly but systematically testing defenses, observing responses, and adjusting strategies. Beyond them, the landscape had been completely transformed, no longer recognizable as the mountains I'd known, but an alien ecosystem structured around fungal propagation. Yet within the barriers, humanity continued. The research facilities had expanded, with multiple laboratories now working on treatment production and distribution. Dr. Williams greeted us upon arrival, exhausted but triumphant. "Your materials changed everything," she said, leading us through the research complex. "The treatment efficacy exceeds our most optimistic projections. We've stabilized over 40 recently infected individuals, with partial neural restoration in 27 cases. The treatment wasn't a cure. Those infected couldn't be completely restored to their former selves, but it stopped progression, prevented the fungal intelligence from fully claiming their minds, and allowed partial recovery of independent function. Most importantly, it prevented treated individuals from serving as vectors for further infection." I joined the research team immediately, adding my observations from our journey to their growing knowledge base. The botanical expertise that had once seemed so academic, preserving seeds for some distant future need, had become humanity's most critical resource. Understanding plants that had fought similar battles against fungal invaders for millions of years gave us templates for our own defense. 1 month after our return, treatment production had reached sufficient levels to begin reclaiming territory. Military teams supported by treatment specialists began clearing operations around the safe zone perimeter, expanding the secured area, and rescuing uninfected survivors who had remained in hiding. The fungal organism responded with new tactics, developing infected variants more resistant to our botanical compounds. But we adapted as well, modifying formulations based on genetic information from the heritage seed samples. The ancient grains contained not just one defense mechanism but hundreds, layered strategies developed across millennia of evolutionary pressure. My grandfather's words returned to me often during those days of intensive research. "Plants and people, they're not so different, Declan. Both can be poisoned. Both can be healed." He was right in ways he could never have imagined. The plants I had dedicated my life to preserving now preserved us in return, offering defense mechanisms refined through evolutionary timescales far exceeding human experience. Our technological civilization had made us forget that we were part of this ancient struggle between consumers and consumed, between infection and immunity. The fungal apocalypse continues. I won't pretend we've defeated it entirely. The world has changed irreversibly, with vast regions now dominated by the fungal organism and its converted hosts. But we have established boundaries, created safe zones where humanity continues, We are developing new treatments, new defenses, new ways of coexisting with a transformed biosphere. And we continue to learn from the seeds, those tiny capsules of genetic memory that have survived countless catastrophes before this one. Each contains instructions for survival, developed over millions of years of evolutionary testing. The heritage, varieties, the ancient land races, the wild relatives of domestic crops, all offer lessons in resilience that we are only beginning to fully comprehend. If you're watching this from another survivor community, know that we continue to expand. Treatment, production, and distribution. The seed vault in Asheville has been restored and expanded, preserving not just agricultural diversity but the specific varieties that offer protection against the fungal organism. We're establishing new vaults in secured territories, ensuring this knowledge cannot be lost again. The botanical formula that masks human presence from infected detection has been continuously refined. The latest version provides protection for up to 72 hours between applications, allowing safer movement through affected areas. We can provide formulation instructions to any community with basic chemical processing capabilities. Most importantly, remember that nature created this nightmare, but nature also holds the cure. The plants that were first infected might hold the key to saving what's left of humanity. If you're watching this, know that we haven't given up. Stay alive, we're coming, and we're bringing seeds of hope with us.